Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks very much, and Evcharisto to Tommy, indeed, for the opportunity to be here and the organisation of this wonderful conference, which we're very pleased to be part of. Before I start, I should say that over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to send out a fair amount of information about EU legislation, building on some of what we've said about regional conventions. It might get technical and it might get legalistic, so I apologise in advance if I send you to sleep. And on the other hand, I'm sure that there are people in this room who have been working on marine litter since long before I was born. So if that's the case, and if you have a comment to make, if you have a question, please feel free to jump in and have a dialogue. I'm happy enough to stand corrected. But before I put you to sleep, let me just put across three key messages, which I hope, if nothing else, you can retain from this morning's presentation. And that is that marine litter is a serious problem, and it is one that the EU takes seriously. Marine litter is a shared problem, and it is not one that we can tackle alone. We must undertake collective action at all levels, not just national, not just EU, but also through the regional and sub-regional cooperation, and indeed at international level. And finally, to end on a positive note, that we firmly believe that marine litter is a solvable problem, and that if you put in place the right mix of policy and incentives, then we can fundamentally rethink how we use the materials that today end up as marine litter. So first of all, the seriousness of the problem. I think we probably all recognise the fact that the situation is grave, or else we wouldn't be here today in Athens. Estimates, whoa. I was wondering what was going on here, and it's in fact that the microphone is changing the presentation on me. So let me just skip back to where I was. Yeah, so in terms of the scale of the problem, the estimates of the scale can vary, but we're talking about millions of tons of waste here on an annual basis. And the majority of this is plastic. I won't go over some of the figures that we've heard already, but maybe to just give one example, just to demonstrate what a persistent problem this is. We have Exhibit A here on the screen, which was a wrapper found just off the North Sea in December of last year. If you can make out, it says Raider. Raider was the name that was given to Twix bars before they changed their names in the early 1990s. And the best before date on this piece of packaging is 1988. Which I think gives a pretty good example of just how persistent a problem marine litter is. We've heard a lot already about the costs and the impacts, both in terms of health and environment, that the issue can have. Our latest estimates are that anywhere between 200 and 600 million euro is spent across Europe on an annual basis to clean up beaches as a result of marine litter. Ghost fishing is a significant problem as well in terms of its environmental and economic impact, that nets which are discarded can continue to cause to catch fish beneath the surface and waste that resource, and of course catch fish unnecessarily. We've heard a detailed presentation on the potential health implications from microplastics and persistent organic pollutants, among others. And indeed, the economic cost directly to the fishing sector is estimated at 60 million a year, just to clean up boats and propellers and fishing gear, and lost labour time in dealing with the effects of marine litter. Building on that, it's pretty clear also from the last presentation that marine litter is a shared problem, I think there's an ancient Greek proverb, I think it is, that says that you can never step in the same river twice because it's constantly in motion. And the same thing is certainly true for the seas and oceans. The tourists or the fishermen in any given country can be the best behaved citizens in the world and can take care of their litter. But of course, if your neighbour is not doing something to counteract the problem, then their waste will ultimately end up on your beaches, and they'll still be filthy. So it's clearly something that needs to be tackled together, and that's something that from the EU perspective we like to emphasise, and we support a number of actions at all levels in order to achieve that. At the international level through the UN process, at the regional level through conventions such as the Barcelona Convention, and indeed in our domestic activities at the EU and below. From the international perspective, just to remind you of some of the context, Rio+20 in 2012, the conference that took place, was quite a significant step forward. The outcome on marine litter specifically was one of the strongest paragraphs in the outcome text. It set out a very clear collective commitment to take action in order to achieve significant reductions in marine litter, and the focused purpose of this was to prevent harm to the coastal and marine environment, and indeed it specifically recognised the plastics problem. Now Rio kicked off a process of trying to develop sustainable development goals after 2015, when the current Millennium Development Goals will expire. And in the coming weeks, the European Commission will come forward with a communication in which we will lay out a very clear call to place a strong emphasis on oceans within these sustainable development goals. And indeed, tomorrow morning at the informal Ministerial Council, one of the questions that we're asking ministers to consider is how best do we strengthen the role of oceans in the post-2015 agenda, and indeed potentially through a dedicated goal on oceans themselves, which of course could further down the line incorporate a specific international target. From the regional point of view, we've heard a lot already about the regional action plan from the Barcelona Convention, and I won't repeat the content of that, but I think the key message is that can potentially serve as as an example to other conventions around Europe to follow in that example. OSPAR have committed already in the Northeast Atlantic region to adopt next month a regional action plan. In the Baltic Sea, HELCOM are working hard to adopt a regional action plan next year, and indeed the Bucharest Convention are also integrating marine litter into their overarching strategic action plan. Now, I take the comment from the gentleman about conventions, and it's all very well to meet and to agree these things, but action is needed. I fully agree with that, but let's not lose sight of the fact that 10 years ago, even though it's been mentioned maybe in the 1970s, 10 years ago, this issue was getting off the ground, and we now potentially, within 12 months from now or 18 months from now, have 3 of the 4 regional bodies set up to tackle this issue with specific, and in some cases legally binding, commitments to make reductions, and that is no small achievement. The European Commission contributes to all of these processes in an active way, and from my point of view, along with I know some people in this room, will be heading to Bonn on Thursday to progress the negotiations on the OSPAR Regional Action Plan, and hopefully come up with a final or a near final draft that can then be endorsed at the Commission next month. Now, all of that leads us to the sort of domestic action about what do we do internally within the European Union. Now, our flagship policy on marine protection has already been mentioned, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which sets, of course, the key aim of achieving good environmental status by 2020. And within good environmental status, there's a specific goal or a specific descriptor dedicated to the reduction of marine litter, and to ensure that the properties of it and the quantities of marine litter don't cause harm to our environment. That's the headline goal. The implementation process has kicked off, and we've started the first round. We've already had the first round of implementation in terms of a reporting exercise. I won't dwell too much on the results, because I know we're pressed for time, and we had a bit of discussion on this in the technical meeting yesterday. For those interested, I would direct you towards the link. It's a relatively readable document of about 10 pages. But the key message that comes out of this assessment is that round 1 was being done primarily on a national basis. Individual member states defining targets, setting definitions, carrying out assessment activities. And our opinion and our drive for the rounds that follow are to ensure that there's a much greater degree of regional cooperation as we move towards developing monitoring programs later this year, and crucially putting on paper the measures that member states will have to develop by next year. However, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive doesn't exist in a vacuum, and here's where I move on to maybe the positive note that we fundamentally believe that this is an issue that can be solved with the right actions. And let me start by discussing the 7th Environment Action Programme. The 7th EAP is a sort of a roadmap for EU environment policy from here to 2020. It sets the framework for the next Commission's term of office. You're probably all aware that the European Parliament elections take place in a couple of weeks, and next week, in fact, and following that, there'll be a renewal of the Commission's term. the 7th EAP sets out the agenda that we can expect from that between now and 2020. And one of the headline outcomes of the 7th EAP is a call to set a reduction target for marine litter at an EU level. Now, the EAP has only come into force in January, but we're already busily working away to try to turn that, that aspiration into something concrete. And we're still sort of looking at the practicalities of how much and how do we define and what do we look at when we're specifically trying to quantify this target. But our current thinking is that we'll undertake a two-step process. The first will focus on land-based sources, and we've heard a lot this morning already that 80% or up to 80% of litter that ends up in the environment is based on land. So we will first and foremost focus on land-based sources with a 2020 goal. And then in a second stage, we'll take a longer-term view beyond 2020, looking not just at land-based sources, but also at sea, at other sources, and also about ensuring that there are targeted behavioural measures and incentives to ensure that citizens have access to the right infrastructure, and so that we want to make it easy for citizens to make the right choice when it comes to waste management. Now, because we're focusing first and foremost on land-based measures, it's important to draw on some of the other aspects that are covered in the 7th EAP, in particular in regards to how we think about waste management in 2020 and beyond. And specifically, there's a commitment in the 7th EAP to phase out landfilling. We have some exceptions in terms of hazardous waste or non-recyclable, recoverable waste, but it's essentially to change the mindset away from landfilling, and indeed even in relation to incineration or energy recovery, that these should be last resorts, but that recycling should be the norm. The aim of this is to change the mindset of people so that what today ends up as waste can instead be recycled, reused, and turned into the raw materials for the products of tomorrow. And this is absolutely crucial for marine litter, because if we can achieve this vision of a circular economy, then the plastic bottles, the shopping bags, the Coke cans that we've already seen pictures of this morning are no longer being wasted. They're instead being turned into new materials, and thus they don't and can't end up on our beaches. Now, in terms of making progress towards this, you can see from this slide that some member states are more advanced than others. Graphs like this are always maybe tough to grasp at first glance, but if there's two colours to focus on, it's blue and green. Blue highlights the level of landfilling in member states, and as you can see, there's a huge variation. Some countries on the right basically landfill almost all of their waste, and some on the left have already achieved effective phase out of landfill. So it's about sharing best practice from the countries on the left towards the countries on the right, so that they can move away from simply landfilling and throwing away what is otherwise a valuable and useful resource. The other issue is the green bar, which is about recycling, because still too much of the waste that is thrown away goes to incineration or energy recovery, and instead should be pumped back into the economy as raw material for new products. So what we want to see is to have green the dominant colour on this graph by the time we get to 2030. So that's all very well for a vision, but how do we then turn that into something concrete in legislative terms? The key to this is a forthcoming revision of our three main waste instruments, which will be coming up within the lifetime of this commission. And the guiding principle here, I think, is the waste hierarchy. This is the diagram that you see on the right-hand side, that first and foremost we should be avoiding and preventing waste wherever that is possible. And if it's not possible, then the products that we do use should be designed in such a way that they can be reused rather than discarded. The middle bar there of recycling, as I've touched on, should become the new norm, that when you are finished with something, it doesn't go to landfill or incineration, it is instead recycled. And so the two bottom steps of this reverse pyramid really are the last resort. As part of the legislative package that I mentioned, we're going to come up with three specific sets of revisions. The first is to the Waste Framework Directive, where we're going to specifically set recycling targets for beyond 2030. The current targets run out in 2020, and it's now time to give certainty to everyone who's in the market about what we expect from here to 2030. On the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, we're going to set specific and ambitious recycling targets, in particular in relation to plastics, given that up to 60% of the plastic waste problem, which we've heard so much about, is related to plastic packaging waste, and thus our measures in the PPWD will help to target that issue. And finally, in the Landfill Directive, our aim, as I said, is to phase out landfill except for in the exceptional circumstances, and so ultimately we end up with residual-only materials being sent to landfill. As I said, this package, which will include the waste review and also the first stage of the marine litter target, should come out within the next few weeks or months, and certainly within the life of the current Commission. One final proposal to mention is the plastic bags proposal, because this targets a very specific issue. Our consumption in Europe of single-use disposable throwaway plastic bags is estimated at 100 billion on an annual basis. That's 200 of these bags for each person. Now, it varies a lot from country to country, but out of that vast array of single-use plastic bags, in and around 8 billion of them end up in the environment, littered in one way or another. And we know too well that a significant amount of those can end up on our beaches. So what the Commission has done is learn from some of the experiences within member states, and has come forward with a proposal asking member states to effect a very clear reduction of the use and consumption of these plastic bags. They've enabled derogations from the single market rules in order to allow what we call market-based instruments, but taxes or levies to help drive this behaviour change. And it builds a lot on the Irish case, for example, and I'm not just saying it because I'm Irish. Ireland was, in 2002, the first country in the world to introduce a levy on plastic bags, and I know there's a gentleman from Cork who's going to, I think, elaborate on this a little bit more in tomorrow's event. But the headline message to take away is that within a very short space of time, there was a huge reduction in the consumption of these bags, and indeed the knock-on impacts for marine litter. So we ended up with this kind of a rare unicorn of public policy, which was a tax that was effective, but which actually citizens, to a very large extent, were supportive of and appreciated its presence. That's my lot from the policy point of view. I'll just bring to your attention three other sort of supporting non-policy activities, which you'll have the links there for, and you can look into more if they're of interest to you. The first is the Healthy Oceans Productive Ecosystems Conference, which took place in March. This was the largest marine conference of certainly bringing together the policymakers, industry, academia, NGO side gathering all together in Brussels since the adoption of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And the outcome from this conference was a very clear one-page document which set out some ambitious calls for action between here and 2020 if we're to achieve healthy and productive ecosystems. And specifically it addresses marine litter, calling for strong targets and implementation, crucially, of the action plans that we've spent so much time talking about and drawing up, so that the next stage is putting those, as we've heard already this morning, into action. The second is the Berlin Conference on Marine Litter, which the Commission co-hosted with the German authorities. And the outcome of this, I think, are twofold of interest for this group. The first is a toolbox of existing marine litter actions and activities that are ongoing. There are hundreds contained in that toolbox. So if you're looking for inspiration, there's a first port of call. And also the message in a bottle that came from that conference, I think, is also interesting because it carries out a range, it puts on the table a range of calls for action, which we're in the process of following up on. And then finally, we heard already at the opening ceremony last night about the success of the Let's Clean Up Europe event, which took place on Saturday, including, I understand, here in Greece. I think there was somewhere around 3,300 actions all across Europe. So we're very pleased with the success of this first cleanup day. So if there's one thought to leave you with, it is that I look forward to seeing some of you or all of you on a beach somewhere in 2015 for next year's cleanup action. Thank you very much.